So part of my past is because of a relationship with God like we all have. The Spirit said, do what I called you to do, and I'll take care of the rest.
When you get into that space of realizing who you really are at a core, which is energy, then you can raise your vibrational frequency, your energy level, up to a level where you can connect and make that divine connection.
Black people in this country have to embrace ownership. We don't own anything. Therefore, all the dollars we get go out to somebody else who owns things.
Look for a miracle in America's mess and make a testimony out of your test.
Kind greetings and welcome to Triumphant Thursdays with Dr. PJ Anderson. We have two amazing guests tonight, and we also consider you, the listening audience and the viewing audience, as our guest. Our purpose, our long-range plan, is to encourage you to have and acknowledge and receive and lift up and praise God for your own triumphs. And not necessarily on Thursday, but any day of the week that you have a victory, that you have overcome something, that you have a triumph. Praise the Lord for it. And that is our hope, that as we intersect with a number of people and a number of subjects, that you will find your own space and your own place in the discussion. Feel free to comment. Feel free to ask a question. Feel free to host this event. And we thank you for all that you do on behalf of this broadcast, Triumphant Thursdays with Dr. PJ Anderson. Tonight, our guests are Chaplain Maureen F. Burns, who is really my co-chaplain and our co-chaplain in another venue that we'll be showing you a little later on and inviting you to join us there. We also welcome Reverend Dr. Jamie Eaddy, who is with us through all of the Thursdays that we will be talking about the stages of grief. She is an incredible person, and without reading her entire bio, I do want to say that she is a professional. She is excellent at what she does, and later on we'll be showing you an invitation from her to all of us, and you can look at all of the wonderful things that she does. But I do want to say that Dr. Eaddy is a spiritual care practitioner. And Dr. Eaddy, I was talking with a friend of mine earlier this week about you, and I identified you as a midwife.
Mm-hmm.
And the lady said, I've never heard of such. And I went on to explain it's the reverse of being a midwife, to bring life into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And as a death midwife, you are helping the person go into the next world. But it is obviously a new term.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that I want to point out is that Dr. J is a licensed and ordained minister by the Metropolitan Baptist Church under the leadership of Dr. H. Beecher Hicks Jr. And many of you who are listening and Dr. Maurice Watson. Many of you who are listening are familiar with the name Dr. H. Beecher Hicks, either as a member of his church or as a student under his tutelage or by reading his books. And so we certainly want to give those kinds of shout outs. And Dr. J is pursuing a certificate or certification in thanatology, and we're going to ask her to share what that means. And she believes that all Black lives matter. That's amazing. Uh, Co-host Dr. Chaplain Maureen F. Burns is writing a book, and to talk about her triumph coming true. That is to say, to be ordained, and she was ordained a couple of years ago as a chaplain in the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, and what a wonderful day that is. Chaplain Burns is an amazing person who has overcome much. And on Tuesdays, she is also our co-host when we are talking about the 7 stages of grief. And this past Tuesday, we talked about anger, and it was quite a conversation. And we may, well, we're not going to go over that conversation. What we'll do later on in the broadcast is introduce to you where you can go to see that conversation, to experience that conversation. But for now, we're going to go straight to our guest. And if Chaplain Mo, if you have something else you want to add to what we have said so far, in addition to introducing to the listening and viewing audience your one project of writing a book, if there's something else you'd like to say, we are open to hearing it and would love to hear it.
Well, I would like to bring up, I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I would like to bring up that I was doing some research on death and dying, and I found out that 22 veterans a day take their life by suicide.
Has that figure gone up because of COVID?
Yes.
Okay, but it hasn't been calculated yet into the 22%?
No, that's the new calculated
That's
amount.
the new calculated
22
amount.
a day.
It breaks my heart because we'll be talking with the administrator about playing these, particularly the Thursday night, and maybe both of them over the next several months, as opposed to jumping into another subject, so that as many people as possible can go with us through the stages of grief. Thank you for that update, Chaplain Maureen. So Dr. J, if you don't mind me calling you that, I think that's in your bio. So Dr. J, one of the things that we talked about this past Tuesday is how anger shows up in our lives, in our individual lives, and we also made reference to the community anger. I think the community is the correct word. The community anger that was expressed by the insurrectionist. And how anger can build up over the years, not just from someone lying to us for 4 years, but some of the lies that we have discovered ourselves about ourselves, that we've been taught from the pulpit, that we've been taught from our parents, that we have discovered as adults that aren't true, and it's not that our parents or our pastors lied to us. It's what they knew, and they taught what they knew. And many of us are suffering from self-esteem, which can be connected to anger. But we would certainly appreciate your pastoral and professional and therapeutic response to to the second stage of the stages of grief, anger?
Yeah. I think start by, first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm glad to be here for a second week. I have enjoyed our conversations. Um, I want to start because people may be listening. And again, we talk about stages of grief, but those stages are not linear. So I know you mentioned that last week, and I think that's just important for us to let everybody know each time that the stages are not linear. So while Kubler-Ross had this as sort of a second stage or phase of grief, that you may feel this throughout your grieving process. So anger. Anger, you may be angry at so let's just use an example. You may be angry at yourself for what you were able to do, what you were not able to do for the dying person, with the dying person. You may be angry at the dying person because they're dying, right? They are leaving you. In a very real, tangible sense, right? We won't be able to touch them or hold them or see their face in the ways that we've been used to doing. And so anger manifests itself in so many ways. Anger at yourself, anger at the dying person, perhaps anger at the medical establishment or healthcare system, which as a Black woman, knowing the history of poor behavior and practice of healthcare with Black bodies, it is reasonable when someone is dying to feel anger sort of toward the healthcare system, anger toward family and friends for how they are responding to you and your loss. And then there are others, but then you might be angry at God, right? Because you've done what you were supposed to do, or why me? Why did my mother, my father, my significant other, my spouse, my child, why did they have to die, or why are they dying? And so you may also have anger toward God. And we reminded people last week, we'll remind them every time that God is big enough to handle our anger and our rage. One thing I find is that anger is a very uncomfortable emotion for us to sort of hold on to. And we're often told not to be angry. We're often sort of shaped in a way that we hold on to our anger. And it grows inside of us. Yes, go ahead.
One of the things that Chaplain Mo said this past Tuesday, she gave an example of being angry because her mother, Chaplain Mo, you tell the story about how your mother found out about who you are and what she did.
Oh, when I was 16 years old, my mother worked as a crossing guard, and someone came across the street and said, "Did you know your daughter's a dyke?" And that's how my mother found out I was a lesbian. And so she came home and waited for me to come home from school. And when I did, she had my bags packed, and she said, "Not at my house. You're out of here." And I was 16 years old and put out on the street in the middle of the winter in Massachusetts.
So how does one deal with that type of an anger? Which, the grief of being put out, is that related to abandonment? Or
Yes,
being
definitely.
abandoned?
Yes.
Absolutely being abandoned. But I think it can be more than that. I can't say exactly how Chaplain Maureen, the anger, because you may have been angry too, as a result of being put out of the house with someone that you love and you thought was supposed to be there and care and nourish you, right?
Yes.
So as parent,
I was not only abandoned, I was rejected.
Right.
So absolutely.
Absolutely. Rejected, your personhood questioned, all of that. So it's reasonable that that Chaplain Maureen may have been angry. But also as parent, or as one who pushes out either what we don't understand, what we are intolerant of, anger because we can't control the circumstances, right? And again, I can't speak for her mother, so I don't want to do that. But in some cases, people are angry because they can't control the circumstances. This is my child. I have an idea of how my child is to show up in the world. And if my child shows up in the world in a way that is different than I imagined, I may become angry as a result of that. Also, sometimes anger is a cover emotion. Sometimes it's fear, right? So my child has shown up in the world in a way that may bring harm because other people will see said child a certain way. Like, so anger could be the result of so many things. But from Chaplain Mo's perspective, if Chaplain Mo, and I'm asking if you were angry, absolutely. Rejection. No one wants to be rejected. No one wants to have their personhood questioned. No one wants to feel like they have to be alone in this world. Like they can't be seen as human in the ways that they show up, in the ways that we show up in the world. So anger is certainly a very valid emotion. It's a natural emotion. Go ahead, Chaplain Mo.
I was certainly angry, but at 16, my fear overwhelmed my anger. I had to figure out how to survive.
Yeah.
And I had to figure it out fast. Like I said, it was February in New England. So I didn't have a lot of options available to me.
Yeah.
And after I got settled in, then the anger hit me.
Yeah. And let me say this, just acknowledging that experience, because I felt it when you said it's a painful experience, and I am glad to see you on the other side of the experience, fully accepting of who Chaplain Mo shows up in the world to be. So I'm glad to see that. And I know that the traces of anger and pain don't necessarily have to have disappeared in your life. That this could be 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 70 years ago for some, but the anger can still be very present, even if it doesn't show up in your life every day. There can be certain things that trigger us. So I'm always encouraging people to know your triggers, to be very self-aware, and to know how you respond in certain situations. So if you are, say, a chaplain, because all of us serve as chaplains, right? And I'm in the hospital visiting with the patient, and I know that whatever the patient has done may trigger something in me. I have to be aware of that because I'm supposed to be providing care for someone, and I can't let the fact that this has touched something from the 17-year-old Jamie impact me in that moment, right? So knowing our triggers, being very self-aware of how we respond and things that maybe we haven't gotten over. So that's, I think, very, very important for us too. But anger is a natural emotion. So we don't want it to seem that anger is a bad thing to have. Anger is natural. But how we deal with our anger, do we let it sit in our bodies and sort of rot and cause pain? Do we not address it so that year after year after year, we have not addressed the anger, and the one person says something to us and they get the explosion of anger that we've not been navigating our way through or getting help with over the years? But anger is a very valid and very real emotion.
So, Dr. J, a couple of things. If Pastor Sue could put the article in that we sent out to our newspapers and on our to folks on our email address, I'm going to ask Chaplain Maureen to read that scripture, and then I'm going to put my question out there.
Go ahead and be angry. You do well to be angry. But don't use your anger as fuel for revenge. And don't stay angry. Do not go to bed angry. Ephesians 4:26-27.
Okay,
And that's the New Revised Standard Version.
thank you. So this is so we learned from examining this, taking a short look at this scripture. Number one, that we are encouraged, we have permission to be angry, and for many of us who have been shamed, who have been made to feel guilty for our anger. For me, that was a relief to know that I have divine permission to be human, to be angry, and to be reminded that vengeance does not belong to us. And so therefore, humans are not to use it for vengeance. And I did it one time, and I tell you, the repercussions, it's not worth doing it. Leave it with whoever. But the one thing that I wrestle with then and now is the fact that it took me years to get over or to be able to manage my anger. Because I don't know that we're ever over, particularly when we look at the way we were brought up in any given church and the things that we were taught, only to find out years later that it's just a little off. Maybe it's a lot off, but at least it's a little off. And that is the number of times that I have gone to bed angry. And how do we, because the last very part of that verse is, or that scripture is, don't go to bed angry.
Yeah.
If you could give us some insight on some therapy on that piece.
So I'm gonna be very, to those who are watching, very transparent. I get angry, and my anger doesn't necessarily go away at the end of the day. And that's why I love the God with whom I have relationship, because God knows that there are some hurts that I sit with, and it might mean that I lie with. Like there are some hurts that I've held on to that I had to get help to work through. So I'm not the expert in not going to bed angry. I'm not the expert, but I will say that I look for ways to navigate and to negotiate my anger. Why am I? So I ask questions. Who am I angry with? Why am I angry? Is it something that someone else has done that's caused the anger? Is it something that I've done myself that's caused me to be angry? Where does the anger show up in my life? Am I waking up and I'm angry with everyone I'm in contact with? Or is it when that person or situation comes to bear that I'm then angry? And then I think about ways that I'm expressing the anger. Is it sort of overt, where I am just enraged and maybe throwing papers or hitting the wall or punching pillows, or being agitated or sort of really aggressive, perhaps even physically with others? Or is my anger more reserved and I'm holding on to it, sort of like that, you boil tea in the tea kettle, am I simmering, waiting for my moment to explode? I can't tell you I'm the expert on not going to bed or not holding on to some anger, perhaps even longer than I should. But I will tell you that I do try to negotiate what's happening. I try to navigate. Why am I angry? Because if I have a way to discuss, to bring to someone else's attention, if this is something that deserves me putting on the table, so that, Chaplain PJ, Chaplain Maureen, and Chaplain Jamie can sit down and talk about this thing, then I'm going to start to negotiate myself. How does that happen? What needs to take place?
So let me bring Chaplain Pastor Sue in, because she said something on Tuesday that I asked her to repeat tonight in terms of her grandmother. And I would also want to ask you to address those of us who grew up in the era which was my era, which was a child is to be seen and not heard, where a child, which would relate to my sister who just passed last November, or on her behalf, was whipped every day of her growing up years, being who she was born to be. And that was, she was old enough to make the decisions that she made, or at least she thought she was. But my mother in particular did not agree, and just whipped my sister, and finally my sister said, "You know what, mother, you can kill me, but I am not going to apologize, because I didn't do anything to apologize for." So what do we say to people who are now adults that lived with their voices being silenced, and if they spoke, experienced corporal punishment, because adults did not seem to understand the difference between discipline and which is having a conversation, in my opinion, and corporal punishment. But first, let's hear from Pastor Sue.
Well, there's one thing I'd like to put in real quick. It's not just children should be seen and not heard. It was women should be seen and not heard.
Yes.
Our era. I'm 60, and that's what I was raised with.
Sure.
And of course, we absolutely didn't speak in the pulpit.
Correct. Pastor Sue?
Hey, y'all. So I'm grateful for this conversation. And I don't know, those of you who watched on Tuesday, you're going to hear the same story over again. But I realized when I found out that my grandma had passed, we knew that she was transitioning. And I didn't consider myself, she and I, close, right? And so, but yes, because she's my grandma, I felt something. She's my grandma. But when I got the call that she had passed, I broke down crying. I mean, just weeping. And I realized in that moment that I was angry at myself for not having ever said to her or spoken to her about the hurt that she caused me. Right. And so now I was like, and now she's gone. I can never talk about it. And she probably doesn't even know that she caused me that pain. Right. But she probably forgot about it. But I held on to it so that it affected our relationship. And so I realized in the middle of my weeping that it was, yes, I was sad that she was gone, but I was more beating myself up and angry with myself because I never spoke to her, never had that conversation with her about my aunt, as we call it.
Yeah.
And one of my recommendations to Pastor Sue, and I even took the recommendation into consideration for myself, would be to write the person that offended me a letter. As detailed as I want to make it, as gross as I may want to make it, and put a stamp, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and mail it to myself to see if I feel differently. I don't know. What do you think about doing something that's kind of out. That's kind of unusual, but That's what we do, on Ash Wednesday. Uh, we burn our when I was in the traditional setting of the church, we would burn we would write our letters and bring them to the sanctuary to burn them,
Mm.
and use those ashes for Ash Wednesday, and hope that as the fire consumed itself, that it was also a healing fire. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
I do tell people to write letters all the time. I think letter writing is one of the easier to access ways to work through our emotions. So whether it's sadness, whether it's anger, like writing a letter helps. So I would say write the letter, write out how you feel, how whatever the incident was, right? Hopefully we're able to trace it back to something, but to say how you feel and how this person made you feel. I think that's really important. But then we have to go deeper. Do I still feel this way today? Are there other people in my life today who do this same thing? Right? How do I address this person who's no longer here and at the same time work on my current environment? So I have, like Pastor Sue, some folks who are not here anymore who I had to deal with by writing a letter, writing out exactly how I felt. I didn't mail it, I just kept it. And then I looked at how my behavior has changed or may need to change as a result of me harboring that anger for so many years. Because we do begin to adjust to the anger that we're holding on to sometimes, right? We may, so if it's a relationship and someone you're grieving and you have that anger, you may then now not allow others to get close to you because you have held on or are holding on to that particular emotion so tightly. So I looked at ways that anger was still showing up in my life, ways that I was beating myself up even today for not addressing a wrong from 20 or 30 years ago. So I think telling her to write a letter, telling Pastor Sue to write a letter was a great way to begin processing the feelings that, she has had for grandma. Like that's a very valid way to do that. And that's why I said sometimes when we are grieving and we're dealing with anger, it's not just that we're angry with everybody else. Sometimes the anger is us. We are angry at ourselves. So for a child who may have suffered abuse, you may be holding on to anger thinking, I should have done something different and maybe I would not have been abused. I should have said something sooner and maybe I would not have been abused. Right. So and you could grieve you're not having a childhood, not having what you thought was the typical or a common or normal, I'm using those words sparingly, right? Childhood. So we can have anger. That anger sometimes is toward ourselves for how we showed up or didn't show up with the people in our lives. So I think the letter writing process is a great way to begin processing that anger.
And for the children, I guess okay. I think that's asking a duplicate question. We're going to have to take a break, station identification break. And when we come back, I don't really want to leave, but when we come back, let's talk about the insurrection and the years and what made for that anger response. Okay, and we want to again remember the children who are children now, who are being abused, and what we could encourage those who are listening to take into consideration when they are abusing children. And if there are any children listening, what you can do to protect your emotions to protect your emotions so that bitterness along with anger and resentment doesn't show up. Pastor Sue?
All right. Oh gosh, this conversation is so needed. I'm getting my whole life over here, but I'm here to do the announcements. First up, we want to invite you to the Veteran Among Us, LGBTQIA Veterans Plus National TFAM National Veteran Support Group. We do meet on Tuesdays. We have a program that just started this year on Tuesdays. We are also going through the stages of grief. And so if you are LGBTQIA veteran and the plus means that or you are allied, and particularly if you are of color, we want you to join our veteran support group here on Facebook under TFAM Veterans. We have some stuff coming up. We do not want you to miss it. So please be sure to join us. And our guest tonight, Dr. Jamie, oh my gosh, she's so phenomenal. She is having a free webinar tomorrow, free workshop tomorrow called Sitting at the Dock of the Bay When Grief Has You Feeling Stuck. And it's taking place tomorrow at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. If you would like to register for it, head on over to tinyurl.com/navigate grief. Once again, it is free. If you're feeling stuck, I do invite you to go ahead and sign up for this workshop. Next up, our other guest, Chaplain Maureen Burns, is finally doing her thing in the life coaching area. Oh, Lord, I spelled that wrong, Lord. Anyway, transformations possible. Learn law of attraction and spiritual principles for success. Chaplain Maureen Burns, who is an advanced law of attraction practitioner. And if you desire some life coaching, you can write her an email at transformations possible, transformation with an S, possible at gmail.com. Next up, Carrot Solutions. Focus on your passion. Let Kara handle the rest. Kara offers administrative business and consulting services for dreamers, visionaries, entrepreneurs, faith, and community-based organizations. One example of what Kara offers is this program that you're watching right now. We do remote production, and so this show is powered by Kara Solutions. And so if you are interested in remote production, and video conferencing assistance, in branding, in show development, in training, and any of the services that Kara provides, we do invite you to visit our website at www.kara-solutions.com or send me, Sue, an email at sue@kara-solutions.com for a free consultation. As always, we want to give you the opportunity to advertise or sponsor, to be an advertiser or a sponsor on Triumphant Thursdays with Dr. PJ Anderson. There are 3 ways that you can do this. One is an info listing or a banner, and I'm going to throw one up. That's what a banner looks like, and we would add your information to this banner, and that is for $15 per week. A static overlay is what you are looking at right now. Anything that covers up the entire screen is an overlay, and that's $25 per week. And we could have your business or service showcased to our viewing and listening audience, and also a banner ad at $40 per week. And I'm going to show you what that would look like with a Kara advert. so that there is an example of a video ad. And so if you would like a static overlay or a video ad created, you could also reach out to me for that. Once again, my email address is sue@cara-solutions.com. These have been your announcements, and let us get back into Triumphant Thursdays with Dr. PJ Anderson.
Well, thank you, Pastor Sue. I want to give a shout out to you, our administrator. Pastor Sue is also the national TFAM, the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, national youth minister. Does an incredible work with the young folk, or those that are much younger than many of us on this call, or even watching for that matter. Very patient woman, and I appreciate her service to the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, and we're going to give a shout out to Reverend Dr. Bishop Eaddy Funder, the founder of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, the founder of Trans Saints, and the founder of the City of Refuge, United Church of Christ, that is now in Oakland. She is our bishop and our prelate. And we definitely want to give a shout out to Pastor Sue's pastor, and that is Bishop-elect Reverend Dr. Vanessa M. Brown, founding pastor of I was going to say Space for Grace Without Walls, but that would be me. Founding pastor of Living Waters, Rivers of Living Waters, and soon at our next convocation of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries will be elevated to bishop. She and her partner are elects to a higher office that they're really already serving in. And so we do want to be certain that the listening audience knows of the people who have taught us and who are still continuing to teach us, and from whom we are continuing to learn. So, having said that, I want one more question is asking you, not question so much as a statement, is to ask you to give to Triumphant Thursdays, which also covers the cost of our Tuesday night program. And we have a Cash App, or you can send a paper check to Post Office Box 23173, Lansing, Michigan. Cash App, $ space for Grace MI. I want to thank those of you who gave last week. We appreciate it. And as soon as I figure out how to acknowledge you, perhaps I'll do that I'll do that on Facebook. I want to thank you for your contribution. It was very thoughtful of you, very generous of you, and we do appreciate it. And hope that you appreciate our ministries enough to sow a seed into us also. Dr. J, you're on.
Thank you. You mentioned something that I've been talking about a bit, and that is sort of white grief, white rage, white anger, and you mentioned January 6th. And so for me, how I experienced that was that white supremacy, whiteness as a social construct is challenged, is dying, is being challenged. That's the only word I can think to say right now, because we know that we can't live under those circumstances, right? We can't thrive brown bodies can't thrive under a system of white supremacy. And so you have people who have been fed a narrative that whiteness, again, as a social construct, is the right way, that whiteness is superior, and that brown bodied people are not whole, are not equal. And if that's been the narrative that you have lived under all of your life, and then you have someone who is coming and saying, well, I know that that's not true, that that's not the case, and we're going to have to address this, even if it's slow addressing, but we're going to have to address this. Of course, part of your grief response is going to be anger, right? Because your power is now being challenged. You feel like you're losing control over power. You're losing control over privilege. You're losing control. And it's not at the hands of brown people, black people. That's not really what it's at the hands of, but because you have been fed this narrative all of your life. And this is how you act out. One, because you know that there's no punishment. We can talk about that as something different. But yeah, anger was what was present and it's still present. It was present long before that day. It was present long before the former president was in the White House. It was long before that. It is a thread.
But he certainly did cite, and he certainly did bring it up to a boiling point. We were talking earlier about being able to let off a little steam when you're in a pressure cooker. He just blew the top off. Yeah.
And he made it acceptable to act a certain way. But we know that this behavior has been going on for a long time. So absolutely. Now that kind of anger, it needs to be addressed differently, because that kind of anger is based in sort of delusion, right? Is based in, I'm angry because my power and privilege is being challenged, and I may not have the same kind of access that I had before, right? But that whole narrative is based on the fact that you believe that people are not equal.
I see. Interesting.
Right, that whole narrative, that the whole white is right and white, that whole thing is, we are superior. We are superior in thought. We are superior in behavior. We are superior beings. And so that kind of anger, addressing that anger, is to also address the narrative that you have lived with that says you are better than the black and brown people around you. And I don't know that that's not going to come from having somebody sit down and write that is real. I need to sit down with me, perhaps with God and the therapist, and really address why I believe that this group of people should not have the same access, should not be viewed as with their full humanity. That's a different kind of anger that I think needs to be addressed. But I do think that it touches grief, though. I still believe that people are grieving the loss of power, the loss of control, the fear that sort of whiteness as a social construct that allows us to have greater access, capital, is being sort of chiseled away. So I do believe that is grief, because I feel like I'm losing it. It is something that is meaningful to me, and I'm losing it, right? So grief is not only or always associated with someone dying. It can be associated with ideologies dying. It can be associated with, right, sort of a loss of access to power. Your access is dying, or you feel like that access is dying. So that's what I'll share, because I know we're always getting close to our time when we have these conversations. But absolutely, you saw anger and rage, but I do think that it is also tied to grief, because you are trying to tell a group of people that the way that we have lived in this country, with one select group of people here and everyone else sort of in tears is not humane, does not honor people's personhood, and is no longer going to be tolerated. And of course, if I have steeped myself in an ideology that says that I am superior and in thought and in behavior, and I should always have access and sort of decide who can come into the room, and you're telling me that you want to challenge that, of course, doing that is going to cause me to grieve. That's what I would say. That's my key.
So how would a child? And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I just needed some reflection on what happened January the 10th, because I haven't got 6. Thank you, Chaplain Mo. I haven't gone to therapy yet, but it's certainly on the top of my list when I talk to my psychiatrist, with whom I have a standing meeting, because I definitely it sent me somewhere, and I don't know where it has sent me yet. It didn't make me angry because I've been working on my anger, or at least I didn't respond in a negative way to my anger. And I needed to hear, what you said, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and Chaplain PJ, can I just say this? That was that perspective of anger, right? I'm angry that, and so many of us are probably still holding on to anger. We got a chance to breathe for a moment, and in that breathing, there was this insurrection that told us once again that you are not wanted here, that you are not valued, that you don't belong. And so I think that people are also, that we're not a part of that, are angry. Because it says you don't deserve, you don't belong. And that would, at least it has made me angry, especially when you see the other side of it in terms of how people are treated as a result of the behavior. You expect repercussions and you don't see that. Then
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we all kind of sit in that anger a bit. And I know you wanted to talk about children, how we help children.
Please.
So you said a couple of things earlier. One, you talked about children being seen and not heard. And I think many of us heard that growing up. And we should all just take a deep breath and realize that a lot of what we were taught, some people were doing the best that they could when they gave
I believe that.
The instructions, when they did whatever it was. My mother, I know she did the best she could.
Sure.
And 20 years later, she would probably do some things a little bit differently.
Sure.
And so for children who are grieving, we always talk about giving them an opportunity to name, to feel, and to name what they are feeling. It's hard to do that if it's an abusive situation, right? That is telling a child to navigate some very difficult waters. But if it's a child who has, say, had a loss, a parent has died, a sibling or a friend, or they're just grieving the fact that they can't go to school, giving them an opportunity to, one, express that anger, helping them with language, with naming, giving them an opportunity to feel, validating who they are and how they feel and their experiences. You can do sort of art therapy, have them sort of draw out. You can do movement. We have kids in sports, running, something that gets their body moving is also helpful in terms of helping them work through anger, because you can also use those moments for conversation. The best thing that we can do for our children is not to ignore them, is to validate their experiences and to realize that they grieve just like we grieve. Even if we're grieving two separate things, it makes their grief no less important and no less deserving of being addressed. So that's what I would, just throw out there as we help children. And for those of you who write, if you're watching and you write, we do need some literature as well that helps people engage in conversations with children. And I've been looking for some stuff, and I'm not necessarily pleased with everything that I found. So, hopefully if you're listening and you're a writer and you love children, you can partner and find ways that you can write pamphlets and little workbooks that can help children navigate their way through not just anger, but grief in general and how to deal with emotions.
And you know, Dr. J, I know we're at the end. In one more minute, it will be our hour. Uh, what do you say to the adults who are doing the abusing? They are so angry that they are passing it on to
Yeah.
their children. How do we teach adults to have conversation and to realize you're probably 10 times heavier than this person that you're beating up on?
Yeah.
And you're definitely a number of years older than this person that you're beating up on, especially if it's a child.
Right.
How what do we say to the adults that are so angry
Mhm.
that they would take it out on a child?
Yeah. So that's why I say therapy is important, because that takes acknowledgement that there's something that needs to be worked out in you. And let's just be candid. Many churches, and I say many churches, past and present, have not affirmed mental health support, right? And they've told people, take it to Jesus, things like that. That I'm not saying don't take it to Jesus, but you can also go take it to Jesus and your therapist.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think being able to acknowledge, I think we started the show talking about self-awareness and triggers and knowing what is in you and what brings that out of you. We really need to get to know ourselves.
Yes.
We really need to spend some time dealing with our own mess, which could be anger, sadness, our own triggers, which might be related to our own experience with abuse as a child. Because even some of the parents who are this way today are also doing the best they can. So we got to find ways in our churches, in our communities, to break cycles by engaging in conversation, by helping people give language to feeling, by reminding people that feeling makes them human, and not saying you can have this emotion, but not that emotion, right? And if we are able to begin having this conversation or continue, because I won't say that many churches are not, there are churches that are doing this hard work. If we can continue having this conversation with people, then we might be able to sit back and look at ourselves and start to do that hard work. Therapy is hard work. Dealing with your triggers is hard work. Figuring out that it's the little girl or little boy or the little you that's angry, that's hurt, that needs to be addressed is hard work. But we can support our community in that, I think, if we begin having these kinds of conversations.
And I know that I will be labeled a heretic when I say what I'm getting ready to say before I have our closing. I wish that many of our clergy would take a good look at the historical and the cultural and the economic and the social environment of the day when they wrote, "Spare the rod and spoil the child." We hear that over the pulpit. Whip them. It won't kill them, but it kills their spirit. It kills and if you're in an abusive relationship, every time you take your anger out, even on another adult, you are diminishing them and their self-worth. And I think that as therapists, we have our responsibilities, but as pastors and particularly as preachers, take another look at why you are preaching, spare the rod and spoil the child. You heard it somewhere. And the person that heard it somewhere. And maybe if you go all the way back to slave theology, as I call it, you heard it from Massa. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Oh, I do want to go on. Oh, my God. I don't want to say goodbye.
Chaplain
Yes, baby.
PJ, just one tip to go back to going to bed angry.
Yes.
I said last week, and I want to say again, you cannot experience gratitude and anger at the same time.
Yes.
So
Yes.
if you find yourself in a place of anger and you can't let it go, list 5 things that you're grateful for.
Thank you, Chaplain Mo. I take responsibility for getting to ask you, because I asked you on Tuesday if you would say that, and you did it. Thank you. I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, saints and friends, foe and ain'ts, thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you for experiencing, our time together. It is rich. Dr. J, you are incredible. Chaplain Mo, you are amazing. Pastor Sue, you are just over the moon, and I appreciate all of you, all three of you, and those of you who are listening, and those of you who are viewing. Until we meet again, would you please consider praying for yourself? That is, in my opinion, where you begin to learn about yourself, what you're asking for, and you get to learn about God. How does God respond to you and your prayer life? And God has been written in Genesis that God posed the question to Adam. Adam, where are you? Now that question is not for God. Any question that you have, it's not for God. It's for you. God will show you, God will teach you, and the Holy Spirit, whom I call wisdom, will guide you into the answers to your question. It is said by the New Agers that everything God knows, you knew before you came into this world. And everything that God knows, you can get some of it. You can't get all of it, because God's thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and God's ways are different from our ways. But you can get a glimpse of how gentle and how marvelous and how caring God answers your prayers. Very soft, speaks very softly. That's why you have to be still and know all electronics off. Light a candle and have an intimate time. Just you and God, who, however you define your God to be. And as I said last time, if your God is the tree in your back door, then go out there and hug that tree until it answers you. But by all means, pray for yourself, pray for your family, pray for your faith-based leaders, pray for our president and our vice president. Pay for the houses of Congress and Senate who are backing up in terms of the consequences that many of these insurrectionists, particularly those who made way for this to happen, who are in the Congress, are already backing up. Well, maybe maybe we shouldn't impeach. After all, what's done is done, and all that craziness, and how can we allow this person who refuses to wear a mask and insist upon bringing a firearm into the Capitol? Pray for Pelosi. And what's the other? What's her counterpart called? What's his name? Schumer. Call them by name, that they will be bold, that they will stand their ground, that they will follow the not only the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law, which is important at this point. The spirit of the law. Who did I leave out? Pray for our children. Pray for Black Lives Matter. Pray for the NAACP. Please join both of those organizations where you live. Did I ask us to please pray for our, yes, I did, faith-based leaders. Who did I leave out, Chaplain Mo?
You got it.
I covered all of the
Our
bases.
Our veterans.
Of course, our veterans. Thank you. And our therapists. Please pray for Reverend Dr. Jamie and pray for Pastor Sue. We covet and desire more intimacy with God. And we get that when people are praying for us to have more intimacy with God. Amen. So
Amen.
until we gather again, be mindful of this thought from Ephesians. Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think on such things. From Philippians, the 4th chapter and the 8th verse. And for those of you who wonder why we quote this scripture, because everything you see and everything you don't see came from the mind of God. We were thought into existence. Remember that when you speak, whatever you're speaking, you're bringing it into existence. Thank you so much. Closing words, Chaplain Burns.
I'm good.
May the Lord be with you and bless you. Good night.